I think the story of love captures everything that we ought to be doing here at St. George's. And so, dear friends, today we celebrate 58 years of glorious worship and service to this community. That's a long time. And I'd like us, based on that history, to reflect briefly on words from the book of Joshua chapter 4, verse 21. What do these stones mean? What do these stones mean? If these walls could talk, what story would they tell? Perhaps they will tell the story of a glorious history, how we went from a mission church with 10 people in September of 1955 to worshiping with 110 people on a regular basis in a self-supporting parish today. Perhaps they will tell the story that Emily and Norm are perhaps few who were here from the very beginning. Perhaps they will tell the story of how lives were changed and people were brought to Jesus. Perhaps they would tell the story of what a fine-looking priest you are. No, I'm sorry. They would tell the story of people who left from this church knowing who God is. I want us to ask ourselves, what story are we telling people who walk through this door? I hope that we are telling the story that we are walking in the footsteps of George R.C. Because George was a brave but courageous man. He fought in his commitment to Jesus for others. And he died because of what he believed. I believe that if we are going to tell the story that we are a people of God, that we love and know God, that we are committed to God, then we ought to learn from George. We ought to learn three things if we are going to continue to build this church and we're going to grow this church together. One, George was committed. He was unquestionably committed to God. And we must ask ourselves at all times, am I committed to God? Are we committed to God? I remember one Sunday, a friend of mine, we were at church, and as we were coming out of church, the priest stopped him and said, you know, I know you serve in the army, but you need to start serving in the army of the Lord. He says, well, I do serve in the army of the Lord. He said, well, that's strange, because I only see you at Christmas and Easter. He said, I'm in the Secret Service. Is our commitment just Christmas and Easter, or is it all the time? See, when people see our commitment, they are inspired. When people see our dedication, they are inspired. I challenge us to be more committed to Christ, more committed to building this church as the years go on. But George was also confident that through all the struggles he would face, that Jesus was still Lord. I wonder in your life and in the life of this parish, as we face an uphill battle of doing God's work, are we confident that we can find enough forgiveness in this congregation? That we can find enough love? Are we confident that God gives us enough? That He is the El Shaddai, the God of more than enough to supply all our needs? It calls for faith. See, when you came to church this morning, you sat in this chair and you didn't even question whether or not the pew would hold you up, did you? And how often do we go to a doctor whose name we can hardly pronounce, take a prescription we can hardly read, take pills according to that prescription that we don't know what the effects will really be, but we trust that it will happen? Do we trust God that way? Do we trust Him enough to walk by faith and not by sight? We must have that confidence that God is going to give us what we need to take this church another 50 years and beyond. And finally, like George, we must have courage. The courage to be open to where God is leading us. The courage to represent Christ in a world that tries to push Him aside. The courage to say the Lord's Prayer and to pray openly. The courage to be who God calls us to be. The courage to open our doors that whosoever comes in here, we will love. The courage to love and forgive one another even when it hurts. If we are going to build this parish, we need to have that kind of courage. The courage to give the young people their space and to give others who want to participate their space. The courage to pass the baton. And yes, to let others lead. I pray then, as we move forward, that we be a committed church. A church that's confident in God. A church that has courage. See, when Joshua erected those stones and he asked, what do these stones mean? It was to remind Israel that the Lord had brought them into the promised land, and it would remind generations yet unborn of who God is and what he had done for them. I pray that these walls here will represent hope to the hopeless, love to those that go unloved, forgiveness to those that need healing and reconciliation, and a home where we can all come, whosoever will come and find that Jesus is Lord, and he's still the answer for the world today. Would then that we be a church committed, yes, courageous, and yes, convinced, confident that he is Lord. Yes, we are St. George's. Amen.